So I'm Scott Case. I'm the CEO of the Startup America Partnership. And again, thank you all for joining us. Today we want to just talk a little bit about really the focus of the intersection between startups, and I'm going to give you a clear definition of that in a moment, and how government intersects. It's not really a policy discussion, and I'll wade into some of the ground rules of how we're going to go here. But I wanted to start this morning really kicking things off with what we're really talking about here, which is young, high-growth companies and the importance of startups to our economy. And I thought no better way to do that than to actually have a startup come up and pitch their business, and one that's highly relevant. I think this was actually accidental. It just turned out to be quite serendipitous. But we partnered with a group called Startup Rock On, and is Ryan here somewhere? Hi, Ryan. And so Ryan Costello from Startup Rock On is going to introduce the winner of a Startup Rock On Challenge. And Startup Rock On is doing events around startups, both here at the RNC, as well as the DNC in Charlotte next week. And so Ryan will do a quick talk about Startup Rock On, and then we'll have the winner of the Startup Rock On Challenge come up and give you a 30-second pitch about their business to sort of set the tone about the kinds of companies that we're talking about. So with that, Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Scott. As you guys may know, Startup Rock On is actually a partnership of 3 startups that are trying to celebrate and honor America's startup culture. Event Farm, CEO of Event Farm here, Lee Brenner with Hypervocal, Kwasi Asare with Fighter Interactive. So these are 3 startups that decided that startups needed a voice and a bigger presence at the Republican and Democratic National Conventions, and that's what we're doing. And we partnered with Startup America, and we're proud to have them as our partners. Anyway, long story short, we put our money where our mouth is in startups, and we decided we're not only going to celebrate startups, we're going to help them. So we put together a startup challenge here in Florida and also in North Carolina, and proud to introduce our winner of the first Startup Rock On Challenge. We actually are giving Jordan's company some money, some seed money to help move it along. But anyway, I want to introduce Jordan from Citizen Investor.
Thank you so much to all of you. Jordan Rayner with Citizen Investor. We are a Tampa-based startup. Citizen Investor is a crowdfunding platform for local government projects. So these are projects that are coming directly from municipalities. For some reason or another, the municipality doesn't have the budget for these particular projects. They pose them to citizens, like most crowdfunding platforms. When a project reaches 100% of its funding goal, the money exchanges. We never hold the money, so we don't have to go through government procurement, praise the Lord. And we take a 5% fee of all successfully funded projects. So you can learn more about us at citizeninvestor.com. We're launching a pilot program in 2 weeks in Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, Newark, New Jersey, and Tampa will be following suit soon after that, and we're in active conversations in 35 municipalities across the United States. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. So Jordan represents the kinds of basically innovation, and as I said, it was serendipitous because sort of intersection of a startup mentality, looking at a challenge. Lots of local governments are faced with all kinds of budget challenges, and yet there are things that the citizenry wants to accomplish, but putting the power of that in their hands. Now, when we look at startups at Startup America, we're really focused on a particular category of company. Young companies, not necessarily young people, but young companies typically less than 5 years old. And the reason for that is if you look at the last 30 years, almost all of the net new jobs were created, and I'm going to put quotes around created because I want to come back to that, by companies less than 5 years old. So if you want to look at where the employment is going to come from, if you look at it across the United States, it's young, innovative companies that are driving that growth. And it makes sense. They're the disruptors in our communities, and it's all about growth. And the reason I put quotes around created is that it's almost never the intention of a startup to create jobs. It's an intention of the startup to create a successful business that's going to drive growth. And it's through that growth that we hire people. And often we hire them really fast if we're in a fast growth mode. And that's what creates those new opportunities. So it's this category of company. And when we look at it through a lens of government, one of the things that we see, and this is a big part of what Startup America has been focused on, is helping to educate all levels of government that there is this category of company that is unique. These are not small businesses that suddenly get big. They're companies that at the outset had an ambition to be larger businesses and have built their companies in a way that brings them to that place. And they don't all succeed, but it's their intentions and their attitudes and their ambitions that drive them. So as you look at it, that's the kind of companies that we're talking about. And as I introduced our panelists, we're going to start by talking about each of our own startup stories. I was one of the founders of a company called Priceline.com. I had plenty of failures along the way, started a company in college, started companies that didn't work out. But they were all in this mentality of early, young growth companies. So as I introduce our panels, what I want you to hear about is not only the jobs that they have today, but through the lens of them as startup founders themselves, because there is a mentality, it's a culture, it's a vibe, and it's happening all across the country. It's not only happening here in Tampa, and it'll be happening in Charlotte, but it's happening everywhere. And that's what Startup America is all about, is these are happening all throughout the United States. Right now there are 28 startup regions, including Startup Florida, Startup Texas, Startup North Carolina, Startup Michigan, Startup Tennessee, Startup Colorado, Startup California, all focused on bringing the community of high-growth startups together to help elevate their game, because ultimately the startup economy is what's driving the U.S. economy. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to do it really quickly, and I'm going to try to do it so I don't screw it up, so I don't miss anybody. So, paper, actually. Hard to believe. The effort to get paper turned out to be a challenge this morning. So I want to start with Congressman Darrell Issa to my left, who is an entrepreneur in his own right, and we'll ask him to talk a little bit about that. Then I'm going to move on to George Placencia, who's the chairman and CEO of Republica. Zalmy Duckman, who is the CEO of Fresh Diet. And finally, Travis Kalanick, the founder of one of the founders of Uber. And just very quickly, kind of in the style that Jordan gave, what I'd love for you guys to do is give your 30-second pitch from your startup experience. And I'm actually going to go in reverse order here. So Zalmy, why don't we start with you? You're in the midst of starting your company right now, and you're a few years into it, but tell us more about Fresh Diet.
Sure. So the Fresh Diet is a daily diet delivery service. We deliver 3 meals and 2 snacks to our clients' doorsteps every day. Started the business in Miami, a little older, about 6.5 years ago, and expanded very rapidly in the last 3 years. We operate 6 kitchens around America. We deliver to about 4,000 people every night. And we've created about 250 jobs in the last 2.5 years. So it's been an exciting journey, and I'm happy to be here on the panel.
Cool. My name is George Placencia. I'm also from Miami. Welcome to the great state of Florida, those of you that are not from here. I started Republica 5.5 years ago. I was coming from a career in sports, working at our baseball team, the Marlins, then for Gloria Estefan and Shakira and a lot of artists, and then was with Univision for many years. My last job there was running the radio network. Took all of that and said, I want to put this all to work for myself and my future, and started with my business partner. We started Republica 5 years ago, and it's a cross-cultural advertising communications firm reaching folks like myself, people that live in 2 worlds. I'm Hispanic, so I consume media in English and in Spanish. I literally live in both worlds, so it's for companies and brands that want to reach folks like myself across America, and we also do some work in Latin America.
Hi, my name's Travis Kalanick. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Uber. Our motto is everyone's private driver. So what that means is taking that luxury that only the ultra wealthy had of having a driver on staff to take them wherever they wanted to go at any time of the day or night. We're bringing that to the masses. And so what it is a smartphone app, iPhone, Android, etc., where you open it up, you push a button, and in 5 minutes a town car appears. It takes you wherever you want to go. We're in 17 cities around the world, rapidly expanding, probably doing about somewhere in the neck of the woods 100 or 200,000 driver hours every week. So we've created, essentially our technology has created thousands of jobs, probably maybe even tens of thousands of jobs at this point across the country. And really it's about making cities a better place to live, a better place to get around, a more efficient transportation system in cities across the country.
I guess I'd be the other end of the spectrum. 32 years ago I left the Army and had no money but a pregnant wife. So I had a need, and I discovered that there were 2 ways to make money. One of them is working for other people on products that they figured out somebody needed. The other is to figure out the product that is needed before they do. So we made electronic bug killers that didn't require pesticides. We made FM amplifiers that would deal with the fact that at that time General Motors had decided this great idea of putting the antenna in the windshield. Unfortunately, the technology was not yet very good, so you didn't get any reception unless you amplified the FM signal. Ultimately, getting into the challenge of protecting your car from being stolen, discovering that it was a great business of about $2 million a year because people had a need not to have their car stolen. But we along the way discovered that they had a great desire to feel like they had control. So once we started opening the trunk, locking and unlocking the doors, even starting the car, we suddenly had a group of people who had a want. And that was really what made our company take off and double and double and double year after year, quickly getting over 100 million and giving me the opportunity to go to Congress, was that we'd started off with needs. That shitty ass Apple that doesn't have enough power to get you through the day, so everybody here has a backup battery plug-in system, or it just runs out of battery. That's a need. But the Apple iPhone is a want. It's something that does things for you that you want, that you didn't have the need before they did it. And that's a lot of what I try to bring to Congress, is an understanding that solving needs creates jobs, but entertaining people's real wants creates lots of jobs and lots of growth industries. And that's what hopefully somebody from a long time ago in manufacturing brings to today's challenges.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. So I'm going to, in the spirit of getting the struggle out of the way, I realized that I needed to read something official. This will be the only official thing I say. This panel is intended by Startup America Partnership to provide information that educates people on a broad variety of topics that are important to entrepreneurs. Startup America Partnership may not and does not take positions for or against candidates for public office, and we have asked that the panelists refrain from doing so here. Don't ask.
Listen, you can ask, but try to enforce against the politician.
I just was asked to say it out loud. We have it on video. Now I can go back and say, look, I told them. I know we're at a Republican National Convention. Next week we'll be at the Democratic one. So anyhow.
You'll have the same exact problem,
exactly.
Same phrase.
Oh no, this will be the same thing. I'll just put it in my pocket now so I won't lose it. So what I wanted to wade into here a little bit, and I'm actually going to start with Uber. So when you look at the role of government and startups, most startups and most founders kind of will have a visceral reaction of like, just let me be, okay? Like I got to do my job here, and yet we intersect, whether it's active or passive, with regulations and government policies all the time.
I think they call it passive aggressive.
Well, with that, Travis, just talk a little bit about Uber and some of the, you're right in the middle of the fray right now, and sort of frame it from your perspective, and keeping in mind that, there's two aspects of what Uber is doing, right? One is you're solving a particular challenge for individuals, consumers, and that's a really positive thing, and yet everybody wants to know that it's safe and that it's reliable and all those pieces. So there's a challenge there, a tension, if you will, and then there's all the other pieces. So,
well, look, I think that's actually not the tension, right? So our customers love us because we are providing reliable, safe rides in cities around the country. And drivers love us because we're providing an alternative for them to make a living, and a much better alternative than, say, driving a taxi. So the tension isn't between riders or the supply side, what we call the supply side, or the drivers. It's really, the tension is between the existing infrastructure, or let's say the existing regulated industries that feel like they're getting disrupted, right? And the progress that citizens want in their cities, right? So technology brings that progress and innovation to a city, and because of just where we are in the technology life cycle, and it's 2012, it's happening a hell of a lot faster than it used to, and it's happening in core city services. And so things that used to take decades to change core city services are now taking months. And it's going head to head with, this sort of relationship that often happens with regulators and the people that they regulate. A lot of times the regulators start to protect the industry that they're regulating, and it often stymies innovation. So we're out there making sure that folks know about the progress that we're bringing to cities, and also letting the powers that be, especially mayors and other elected officials, know that progress and innovation is happening a lot faster than they're used to. And they've got to let the folks underneath them and the agencies underneath know that you got to be pro-innovation and progress in your city, otherwise your constituents, either side, blue or red or whatever, they're going to let themselves be known because social media is here.
Right.
And there's no more backroom deals that get done where citizens don't have a voice.
Zalmi, did you run into anything? I mean, here it is, you're delivering food, right? So there's all kinds of policy and regulation around packaging the food up in one end of the spectrum and then delivering it to somebody's home. Challenges as you've been expanding across the country, anything you've faced unique?
Of course we deal with the health department in each specific city, so we see that unlike how small business have emerged with technology and we're talking to each other, states are of course not talking to each other, and you see how different it is when you're going to one state compared to another state. So you get frustrated in terms of the local level, but at the end of the day, thankfully, we've really had positive feedback on a federal level if they've ever come from the USDA or anything like that to the kitchen, and really haven't had too many issues. But of course, regulation is always there, and we know it's there in terms of employment contracts and whether it's an independent contractor or a W-2, and they're always. It's always part of your business, especially in a business like us with logistics every single day. So we definitely feel the pressure of regulation, but thankfully I don't have any war stories, or anything like that. But as I was telling you earlier, I mean, I definitely feel like I built my company. But at the end of the day,
You built your company?
I built my company. I know. It's crazy.
Stepped right into that one, Zalmi.
Yes, but at the end of the
No,
day,
you didn't.
But at the end of the day, as to no, I didn't. I did get an SBA loan early on, and it was very helpful in the early getting out of Miami to be more national. So you do have to balance, the government and the fact that you built it. But at the end of the day, I did build my company.
So when you look at that, you've brought up three things that come up already. So when we look at all startups, it's customers, talent, and capital. You talked about hiring, you talked about access to capital, and people who aren't necessarily familiar with the SBA, it's actually a loan from a bank, and the SBA acts, the government acts as a guarantor in that game. So they're not making this.
Right.
It's not like the SBA is deciding whether you should get it or not.
Right.
It's actually your relationship with your bank. And then you brought up on the customer side, you're actually building a whole new category of customers, right? That normally wouldn't have used this kind of services that you're using. So when you look at it from sort of those lens, it seems to me, and I really want to get your perspective on it. So your colleagues in Congress, like at the federal level, and I think this is true at the state and local level as well, do they get it? Do they understand the basis of sort of the entrepreneurship thing and the notion of these startups? That's good. Could you work on that? There's only 434 of them, so if you could just work through that list on the House side.
Actually, there's 440.
Oh,
Don't
there you
forget
go.
the delegates.
I apologize.
And especially if you do business in the District of Columbia. But your question is a wonderful one, and whether it's federal, state, or local, it all has the same reality, which is you cannot teach somebody after they enter government to really appreciate what they didn't know the day they came in. And that's just inherently one of the challenges. People come with a certain attitude and inclination, and we have a number of members of Congress who did start their own businesses, grow them, a few in technology, a few in manufacturing, quite a few who sort of inherited mommy or daddy's company, but at least they signed the front of a paycheck and they knew what it was like when they were trying to figure out whether there'd be enough to meet payroll. But it's always going to be too few. It's always going to be part of the problem. And the nature of the beast is when corporate America, whether it's large or small, comes in to see us, they absolutely would look and say, well, wait a second here. You're running a delivery service. Is that regulated? And if it's regulated, are you working against me? Because I should be delivering the poultry, not you. And I'm paying a fee for it. The cab industry, classic example. What's the value of a shield or the medallion in New York City?
$1 million.
$1 million. So, and where do they go? They go to government for protection. And that's one of the biggest problems is government's answer is, okay, what's the level of protection we've started with? What's the status quo? And how do we build on it for the new entity? Rather than the question of, well, wait a second, why did we ever restrict the number of cabbies, the number of limos? Why didn't we simply say we had to protect the public, so we need their fingerprints, we need their pictures, we need some accreditation, and once you meet that requirement, laissez-faire. Why do we care how many cabbies there are as long as they all play by the same rule? You didn't enter that world. You entered the world of a cartel of some size, created and protected by government. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you're a businessman, you're inherently a libertarian until you're established. Then you're inherently a bureaucrat. And that becomes the challenge, is how do you get libertarian views? And I've got Consumer Electronics Association here who's been really good at trying to say, give us less regulation. You know, why is the FCC constantly trying to sell us spectrum? Well, because somebody has a business plan that depends on more and more proprietary exclusive spectrum. But we all know that there's more data carried, including voice, by 802.11 today than there is by the paid bought spectrum. And yet government doesn't hear, well, give us a whole lot of free spectrum to let us innovate off of. What they hear is sell us spectrum so that our business model works. And that's one of the problems we all face, depending upon how much we're impacted. We're all faced with the nature of government and, quite frankly, the nature of lobbying.
And so some of it you talked about is sort of the status quo, right? So there's both the status quo, the regulations. Hey, these were built up over a long period of time. One of the proposals out that's been floated around is the notion of kind of sunsetting some of these regulations over a period of time and sort of forcing the debate back again. What I want to understand, though, and George, you mentioned living in two worlds, right? So there a little bit is the status quo. You're in a media environment, and yet there's an enormous population shift that's happened, and so there's all kinds of innovation that's happening there. When you look at it through the lens, and particularly as you're looking at your customers, your clients, and their ability to really communicate to their customers, have you seen anything within your business lens that, like these guys from a regulation or what Congressman Issa has talked about, that you're uniquely facing, that within your business or within the communities that you're serving?
Well, obviously, as we all know, the Hispanic community in America is so diverse. You know, what folks experience in California or Arizona is a little different than maybe in Miami and vice versa. So the community is so diverse. That said, there's similarities among all Hispanics, and it's love for family, love for community, country, all those things I think are very similar within our world. I would say that Hispanics are I believe it's 2.8 million small businesses owned by Hispanics in America. Miami specifically is we're not a big corporate capital, so we're a small business community. I mean, that's what Miami specifically is made of. And as I look at my business, we've grown to, I'm proud to say, about 60 people now, in 5 years in this economy. And, most people are in South Florida, but we've got people spread out working in different parts of the country. And as we've grown, I have to tell you that when you first start out, I would say, I was born in this country, I was bred in this country. My parents came from Cuba in 1961, but made us very proud to be American. Very proud to be American, yet we are very entrenched in our culture, in our Cuban culture. But I would say that there's a lot of I don't know, I wouldn't know where to start looking for government help when I'm starting my business. I know you talked about an SBA loan. I know we kind of looked into that early on, but we said, you know what, it's just not for us. And so we've built our business from scratch based on just hard work and determination and all that. We did a few things early on. I did take out a line of credit early on to make sure that I could cover payroll, because if whoever is in corporate America, I always say this, until you have to cover payroll, you don't know what that's like. I mean, covering payroll has to be one of the most daunting experiences and tasks, I would say, of any entrepreneur, is that daunting thing every 2 weeks. And proud to say that we've always covered payroll, but it's concerning. So I would say, as a Hispanic and folks like myself across the country that want to start a small business, I would say it's just a lot of void of information. Just you don't know where to go for information. You'll go to your local chamber. There's a lot of Hispanic chambers across the country. You'll go to those, and they'll offer some information, but a lot of it is just learning on the job. And I was talking to you earlier. I would say one of the things that I think helps is kind of think globally but act locally, and going to your local politicians, going to your local mayor, going to those commissioners in your district or in your area, going to your members of Congress, you know, in my area, Lincoln, Mario, Ileana, are champions of small business. They really have, you know, they really care about the small business. So all those people, I think, can give you access to just information.
Going to Lincoln's even better now. He's a lobbyist.
Well, yeah,
he's retired. But Mario's still there.
Mario's still there.
But if you look at it, if you think about, and this has come up, and I'll just put a point on this, and then we'll move on to another topic.
Sure.
There is a role for us as entrepreneurs, and particularly this startup class of young, high-growth companies, to spend some time. It may be that a mayor who's never run a business and hasn't faced that payroll experience, but every layer in the stack of certainly elected officials, whether you're a mayor or you're a governor or you're a senator or a member of Congress, you know, growth in our economy is such an important driver, and it's companies like yours. You know, you've gone from 3 or 4 people to 60 people. You've gone from the same number, 3 or 4 people, to 250 people. You're growing like a weed right now. There's an opportunity for that growth, but helping them understand that's not just making payroll is common across these things, but it's also helping them understand that there are needs that these growing companies have. And as you've talked about, whether it's capital needs, whether it's making sure that you have access to the local talent, or that you're not in the way of customers.
And even like companies coming in, like there's a lot of companies in South Florida coming into the area that maybe are establishing corporate headquarters for Latin America in our region, for example. You know, it's good for these folks, local government, to think of companies like myself top of mind. And you know, when they're rattling off to some of these people that are coming in to meet with them, hey, we're going to open up headquarters here, you know, they give them a slew of law firms, marketing firms, accounting firms, you know, small businesses or bigger businesses that can provide services to them. I think that's important. And again, I think it takes a lot of your own quarterbacking to make that happen, and setting up those appointments with these people so that you can get on their radar, you know, because you got to be proactive as an entrepreneur, I think. Yeah.
So let's take this apart a little bit. I want to drill in on talent. There's a lot of challenges when we've got a significant unemployment in the United States right now. It varies pretty wildly when you look regionally. You've got places like Iowa where they're down at 5%, and you have places like New Jersey which are closer to 10%. There's big swings, but there's one thing that I hear across the country from startups, and I'd like to get your experience on it, and then we'll come back to you, Congressman, about kind of your views. You know, are you finding challenges? The gap that we see is there's team members I'm trying to fill as a startup, and yet I can't find the specific talent that I need. Either it's geographically constrained or it's specific skills. Are you guys facing that? Is Uber seeing that as you're growing across the country, and Fresh Diet in particular? Are you guys?
I think Uber's in a fortunate position where we're one of these high-growth Silicon Valley companies that makes it in the press a lot and is high-profile enough that we get a really good, steady flow of folks coming in. That said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've done a bunch of companies, and I've seen the difficulty of finding, especially in the engineering category, finding folks that you can bring on and just start building a business around. And I think there's got to be some changes as it relates to H-1Bs and immigration, et cetera, because I think that is, for Uber, it's not as much of a problem, but for most tech companies in Silicon Valley, at least that's my perspective, that's where we are, it's a very difficult problem, right? So we're seeing, there's a little bit of a bubble happening right now because of the shortage. We're seeing insane offers going out to folks who are available.
From staffing. And so on the end of the Fresh Diet, you've got a different need, and
well,
you
it's
actually
funny.
have some that are the same.
Yeah, we have the same need. I mean, our biggest employment challenge comes on the technology side. We have programmers. We look at ourselves as a technology company. Of course, we're food and beverage, but at the end of the day, technology is driving it, and our system that we've built, our software system, is driving the company. And in general, if you speak to anyone from Miami, you'll hear that it's just very difficult employment, And if I was in Silicon Valley, if you're having issues there, imagine what I'm having in Miami trying to find programmers. So that's probably the number one space in terms of, programmers, technology, where we just cannot find. I mean, we have 2 people on our tech team. We'd love to have a few more, but it's just, unless we open up a office in San Francisco or maybe the new Santa Monica, where there's a new tech that age coming out there, then we've looked into that. But again, the cost of capital to try to do that is just overbearing in terms of let's see if we can find someone in Miami. So anything that can help open up, as he's saying, with the immigration, or South Americans coming into Miami and allowing us to hire them would probably really help.
We have all these engineers that go to all these schools from somewhere else, and then we kick them out when they're done, right? So, like, they get a year to work here, but then after that, it's done. And it's like we open our arms for the education, but we don't allow them to continue to work here, and it seems crazy to me.
George, are you seeing anything at Republica?
Yeah, we experience the same thing. We've moved folks from different places to South Florida, to Miami, based on a need, technology or specific trade within our industry or within our company. I was going to say regarding Miami, there was I don't know if you read in the Herald recently, but there was a big push to really, there was that Silicon Beach for years, where Miami was going to turn into that and what have you.
That's
and
funny.
that didn't happen.
I think putting silicon in front of the name of a city is a sure recipe for
that didn't
trouble.
They were
happen.
too busy applying the suntan.
Exactly. So
Oh, you did say Silicon Beach, right? Just want to make sure which
That's what he said.
Okay, because
there's some ladies from Miami in the room that I'm going to, out of respect,
in Hollywood, they don't want to give up that title.
No, but there's actually a push now by a guy by the name of Manny Medina, who was the founder of Terramark. Talk about an entrepreneur. He sold that to Verizon. And there's a push from him to start something called the Technology Foundation of the Americas. And what it's going to be, it's just for this. It's to make Miami more of this hub for LATAM, for the region, where there's more of this kind of exchange between Miami and Latin America for a lot of what you're talking about, for a lot of the talent.
This is an interesting point, right? So he's talking about Miami trying to be a tech hub.
Right.
But the laws of Miami make it so that Uber's not possible.
Yeah.
Right?
In the city.
Yeah, we are not legal in the city of Miami. We can't roll out.
We've got that car-to-go thing.
No, it's an hour. If you're going to get a private car,
If you call a town car in the city of Miami and it comes in 15 minutes, you have to stare at it for 45 minutes before you're legally allowed to get into it.
Really?
And if you want to get a town car in the city of Miami and you just want to go 2 miles down the road, you have to pay for 2 hours of services, and per hour fare is regulated by law.
I had no idea. But Daimler just came out with this car-to-go, which I mean, they're everywhere. They're these little smart cars, which they're $14 an hour or something.
But the problem is that cities want to be innovative. The cities that want to be innovative have to go there, right? They can't just say I want it and then not walk the walk.
I'm going to send your message back to our mayor.
But you're comparing a classic difference in government.
Right.
Governments are very comfortable figuring out how they tax the rental car industry. As a result, Daimler-Benz, all they had to do was figure out what the tax ramifications were and meet it.
Got it.
Piece of cake. Your problem is that you have both tax and cartel. And they don't, and they look at both and say, okay, you could meet whatever our taxes, you could meet our certification. What you can't meet is our cartel. We don't want to allow these barriers to be dropped. And if I can sort of wind into what you were saying into government, I'm one of the few members of Congress that ever applied for and employed an H-1B employee. And I was thrilled when during the tech boom, Senator Spence Abraham championed expanding that number from like 60,000 to 250,000. For which he was defeated in a Michigan election, as though Michigan was going to be hurt by high-tech people coming there. We were not looking at competitors to assemble the bolt on a car. We were looking at new high-tech workers, and he saw it, and he got eaten alive by a group called FAIR, which is anything but fair as a group. And but the nature of the problem with immigration is a classic example of government can't figure it out because you can't send the right message. I talk about wants and needs. Okay, we all want our extended families to be able to come here. We all want to deal with the 12 million illegals. We all want to do it. What is the ROI on any of those other wants? It's very low to our society. The return on bringing your grandmother here, or my grandmother if she was still alive, it's actually zero. It's not going to add to our economy. The ROI on quite frankly, on more people to pick tomatoes may be marginal. The return on investment of having people who have masters in STEM and PhDs in STEM areas not leaving this country and being allowed to stay here, and particularly be allowed to stay here openly and freely, not indentured to one employer, but in fact owning their own visa, and they can decide what they want to do with their talents, is huge. And yet society and government have a hard time saying, well, let's put, the old economics 101, limited resources, unlimited demands. Well, you allocate resources based on the greatest return on investment. No, we don't. We actually don't allocate based on people who bring capital and bring talent to this country. We allocate based on a whole lot of other things that have more to do with who's already here, who's lobbying, who's got influence at these two conventions. So one of the challenges of technology, and I'm returning to Michael Petrico not only because he's an old friend, but because he and I were together at the consumer electronics industry before I came into government. One of the biggest problems for trade associations and other lobby groups is take all those wants you're hearing and try to figure out how to make a cogent argument to government for the highest return on investment and prioritize it. We don't need comprehensive immigration reform. We'd like to have it. What we need is to beat the rest of the world in the competition for making goods and services and attracting capital and people. And that's where, when you come to Washington, that's what you should be lobbying for. It is the last thing we get lobbied for most of the time.
So there's a role for us as entrepreneurs to play in not only the in the trenches education, but also the understanding about there are different needs in terms of winning the global war on talent and those sort of challenges. I want to shift gears here. I'm going to give you guys a heads up. We're going to go till about 10 after, and in about 2 minutes I'm going to allow you guys to ask some questions. We've got a mic here. We'll come in. We are recording this, so we'll ask you to just speak into the mic. So if you've got a specific question for the panel or a topic you want us to cover, start thinking about it now. So we talked a little bit about talent, which is sort of hot. I want to move to capital. One of the things I see as I travel around the country is there's sort of two categories of startup. Typically, the first timers think all they need is capital, when in reality there's something else that's going on that's caused the challenge. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are companies that are facing challenge either because there's geographic constraints. When you guys look at, Zalmi, we talked a little bit before this around, as you're making the choice around growing your business, I think you've doubled it every year over the last 3 or 4 years. You're at a place now where you're intentionally kind of maintaining a slower growth rate. And talk a little bit about what the constraints are and where there is or isn't even a role from a government perspective,
Sure.
if you see one.
So for us, it's definitely a capital constraint in order to continue growing at 100% or even 50%. I mean, we came into this market, where Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers and Nutrisystem are spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in marketing, and we took a nice chunk of it with a very, very small budget. But if we want to grow 100%, then that we're growing our entire chunk that we took, and that's basically impossible to do without capital. So we've looked into getting another SBA loan as it went from 2 to 5 million, got very excited, can't get anywhere there. I was lucky enough through Startup America to be at the White House when the president signed the bipartisan bill, I think the only bipartisan bill.
The Jobs Act.
The Jobs Act.
Which the SEC has determined they will not execute on.
Exactly.
They're just not going to do it after everyone took credit for it. Now that's government at work.
Exactly. Take it right out of my mouth. I mean, I'm going online. I'm like, okay, great, 90 days. That's July 19th. Looking at the calendar, I'm like, it's August 21st. I Google it. Oh, wow, today they said we're going to meet and we're going to push it off another week. And then today they're meeting again. So if that happened in our business and I hired someone and I said, bring me a report in 90 days, and then he came in 90 days and said, give me another month, he's right out the door. We all know that. So, for us, it's definitely about capital. We're kind of like in that range where if we doubled, we probably have, all private equity and everybody on us. But we're just a little too small for that, where we need to either give up equity or get lines of credit or SBA loans and stuff like that, and we've definitely had a difficult time of that. And so we've decided, instead of focusing on continuing at 100% growth, we'll focus on kind of steadying, focus on profit, because that's all the banks want to see is profit. So that's where we're at.
It's interesting when you reached that, and you talked about the Jobs Act, which has all kinds of new tools to open up capital markets, and as you mentioned, the SEC hasn't. They're supposed to meet now. Maybe by the end of this, we'll have an answer that isn't punting.
No, we got the letter. They're punting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Mary Shapiro has already said effectively they're punting. It's not to be determined. They will not get it done. They are putting Dodd-Frank ahead of jobs. And be honest, both laws were passed. Both laws require execution. One of them liberates capital. The other, in fact, quotes, protects the public. they're going to do that protects the public, and this president will finish his second term if he gets one, and he will still be working on Dodd-Frank. It's the nature of how expansive that piece of legislation is.
So one of the constraints, and you brought up, kind of looking at it through an ROI lens as opposed to looking at it through other lenses. We'll turn it over to questions. If you have a question, raise your hand here so I can flag you. As you guys look at it from the capital constraint, are there things that Congress can do to compel agencies, or is it, how does that work from your seat, or not, as it may be?
Well, we've all eaten spaghetti. How many of us have tried to take a piece of cooked spaghetti and push it in a straight line? Agencies do not respond to any great amount to Congress. They by definition respond some to executive orders because those are nuanced, those are specific, and they carry a specific force. Congress has a much harder time doing it. Usually where we have any real power is we say, well, we just won't fund you unless you do X. And the power of the purse string is the only real power. One of the big challenges in the regulatory environment is even if you're the President of the United States, bureaucrats are forever. Political appointees are at the pleasure of the President for up to 4 years, second term if there is one. That is the biggest problem. You send in political appointees, and this is true of governors and mayors, and they say, okay, we're going to fix this, and you send in a well-meaning person, you strip them out of their business, and you ask them to take a pay cut and go do it. They go in to do it, and what they find out is they can be outlasted by the system. So it's one of the challenges when you create a bureaucracy, you ask, have I created an essential bureaucracy that has to be there, and have I limited its scope? And the answer almost always is, no, it wasn't as essential as you thought, and absolutely you didn't limit its scope. And so from a standpoint of, for example, if you want to fix the problem that you're having with Miami and cabs, you first have to completely change the bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy unchanged, the only thing you can do is lobby for slots. You'll essentially be lobbying for limo slots and for regulatory changes that allow you to survive within that. Well, that means you're part of the problem of trying to take a flawed system rather than saying, what was the protection to the consumer, and did you limit it?
And just in response to that, I think one thing that is missing from that picture is where social media and blogging and social networking has gone. Is that for the first time probably in history, we had a situation where DC didn't, the district itself didn't like us existing. And so they tried to pass a law where the law was introduced at 4 p.m. on a Monday and was supposed to be voted on 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. But we activated our user base in DC. 50,000 emails were sent. Those were original emails. 37,000 tweets. 105 million social media impressions, and the amendment was withdrawn. And so I think technology has gotten to a place where constituents that are passionate about something have a lot more power in a lot shorter period of time to get things done.
But that's because you had a relatively small group of people who feared the next election.
Correct.
If you had had a limo commission,
which broke the,
you wouldn't have succeeded. Because
well, there is in DC.
No, but I'm saying if you had had bureaucrats, unelected, unaccountable, who simply had to regulate and they had a mandate, you wouldn't have succeeded, which is why you're going to have a harder time in Miami. The biggest problem I have is convincing startups that they have to be libertarians. And they have to stay libertarians. And once they get to be successful, I need Steve Case to still be a libertarian all of his life. Because if you're not a libertarian, you don't understand that all businesses create the barriers from future businesses entering. Almost every big business has found a way to make the barriers greater than they were at the time that they entered the market. And that's inherent in the preservation. Big corporate America is not your friend. Big corporate America wants you to be their vendor. And many companies, their business plan is to realize how bureaucratic and bad corporate America is, therefore I'll make money by being a little more efficient and feeding on the big fish. Well, that's fine, that's perfectly legitimate. But there's a reason that no new car company succeeds. The car companies have erected huge barriers to entry. Your capital is immense. There's a reason that the SBA gave you that loan. is that those loans are great. They take banks from making loans they would otherwise make and cause them to send you to the SBA so they can make the same loan, make the same money, and reduce their risk to zero. You know, the government actually didn't create more successful businesses. We simply funnel things into a system where we take the credit for your success when in fact, you know, the banks would do this with ordinary risk, except that they can funnel you into low risk. And most of SBA loans, by the way, are for buildings. Okay, they're really good at loaning you for a building.
Well, capital, so they like things that have an infrastructure tied to them. So let's switch gears here just for a second. Questions, and we'll move a mic around here. So if you've got a question, just raise your hand. We've got one here, and just introduce yourself and then ask the question.
My name is Sarah Hand. I came up from Sarasota, and I'm with the Gulf Coast Venture Forum. It's early stage investment funds. So we know that it's broken, and there's a big difference between the perception of government and what people really, what they think, and what's really happening down here. What do we do about it? I mean, from your perspective, I mean, we understand. I mean, I was in an economic development meeting, and there was somebody who travels all over the country to advise people on site selection, and they said that Sarasota, where we live, is predominantly just for tourists and for people that want to retire, and that there's no entrepreneurs there, and basically, why would we invest in early stage companies? That's pretty risky.
But you are pretty welcome to the newlywed and the almost dead, aren't you?
Yeah, from where I sit, and I run a business and technology community, we have all kinds of people relocating. I mean, we live in paradise, and we have no state taxes. It's a beautiful place to build a business, but the awareness of what's going on at a government level is absolutely imbecile. So what do we do from our level, from bottom up? How do we push so that we get some sort of awareness? And like you said, if people don't know before they get to government, how do we do that? I mean, I know we vote, but what more?
Congressman.
Fortunately, you have an entrepreneur as a congressman. You have Vern Buchanan down there.
Mm-hmm. So just from that perspective, you know, okay, you're a member of Congress. You know, do those 50,000 emails matter to you? Do the entrepreneurs who may take the time to show up at your district office to talk about, here, I'm facing this challenge, can you help? Does that influence you and your colleagues? How does that play out just in terms of a straight-on education?
I think most people on the panel and probably a lot of people in the audience know what we did with SOPA PIPA, where the Congress was bound and determined to run through something on behalf of the Motion Picture Association that was going to be incredibly damaging to online activities, particularly if you dealt with any kind of intellectual property. You were going to be sort of forced to be part of their protection system at your expense and your peril. Online media changed it overnight, and everyone from Wikipedia going dark to Google putting that stripe over and so on. Politicians ran in. I mean, it's amazing how many. I mean, I literally, you know, people were suddenly born again, and they suddenly had always been against that which they co-sponsored and spoke on in committee. So yes, you can. The reason I asked the other question, though, is you got to look at what you ask for. If you get as excited asking for the Jobs Act to be implemented, and implemented now, and implemented ahead of new bureaucracy that's part of Dodd-Frank, and that the SEC's obligation should be for capital formation being easier, better, and faster, and that they knock down the barriers to your being able to do crowdfunding, then, hey, you're asking for something that should, on a return on investment, be higher priority. That's not what they're coming in and demanding for. There wasn't the level of outrage when it sort of died over at the SEC. You know, everyone had the signing ceremony, and trust me, if they're not going to rush it through before the election, it's not going to be rushed through after the election. Because remember, Mary Shapiro is a political appointee. So my challenge is, be careful what you ask for. Ask for those things which do the greatest, broadest good, and use internet outreach for exactly that. H-1B is a bureaucracy. It is a system that is complex. If you double the number of H-1Bs, it still doesn't fit a lot of people's need for high-tech workers. And by the way, it's not the best way to have somebody who was educated here from somewhere else become a successful entrepreneur, because H-1Bs don't fit the, I'm going to live for nothing in my cousin's shack and eat graham crackers until I get my business going. It's no, I have to get a job that qualifies for my visa. So again, H-1B, good program, love to see
So
more
you've
of it.
got-
But there are better programs you should be lobbying for, like everyone who finishes with the kind of skills that we need from our universities being allowed to stay here for a long enough period of time to actually make a difference. And I'll be slightly political here. You understand, the president by executive order thinks that he can have millions of people illegally here stay here and be handed a visa that was never approved by Congress, never signed by a president. But has he done the same thing for the college grads of the same season? I'm 18 to 30 and I'm illegal, I get to stay here. I'm 18 to 30 and I got a PhD. This year, I don't get to stay here. Where is the outrage that he didn't at least include people who graduated from MIT this year?
You brought this up a couple times. Did you want to add something real quick?
I just have to say this, you know, and I respect you tremendously, and but I obviously don't agree with a lot of what you're saying about immigration, you know, but I respect it. You know, I respect it. But my parents, you know, I wouldn't be where I'm at today if America wouldn't have welcomed them here, and for hundreds of generations. For hundreds of years, generations wouldn't have been accepted into this country. So I understand what you're saying, but I think the whole thing needs reform.
But a million people
you know,
a
so,
year,
but,
a
you know,
million
because
people a year
I know a
come
lot of
here.
those dreamers. You know, I know a lot of those dreamers that, you know, they came over
So
with
let's-
their parents.
let me
you know,
just
so
cut
they
this
came
part.
over with their parents, and now they're great members of this society. It was not by choice, obviously. They went to school here. And, you know, I just think we're getting into something.
But you're
that-
assuming I'm disagreeing.
No. I'm just saying that I heard you earlier when you were talking about, you know,
There are a million people a year who come here. More people immigrate to the United States legally than every single other country on the face of the earth combined. The only question is, why are we taking the highest return on investment and not putting them at the front of the line? You know, the fact is, Cuban Americans came here specifically because they were fighting oppression. We can take everybody who in fact is dealing with that kind of oppression, and we have. That tends to be a category that doesn't even have a limit. But when you look,
and I'm speaking, I know,
but I did talk about, you know, family reunification.
I know.
Is grandma the first priority for this year? Hundreds of thousands of grandmas, or the MIT graduate?
Let me just stop you for a second.
I would say it's grandma and the MIT graduate. That's my opinion.
So let's take this. So I think what's come up though, and this has happened across the country as we look at all these startup regions and that Startup America has been coordinating, is there is a need for startup founders to spend time communicating with each other and educating themselves about some of these things, so that they do have a voice. Because there isn't that level of outreach. Whether it's a passionate plea around how immigration is impacting your business growth, or it's tackling SOPA, or it's dealing with the slowness of the SEC or the priorities of the SEC. So, you know, as you guys as entrepreneurs think about part of your role, one of the things that I would encourage you, and I think everybody up here would agree, is there is a role for you to play to activate, and it's a numbers game as much as it is anything else. But it's numbers, and then I think you've said this really well, it's organizing around and thinking about what specifically do you want to be different, right? So if it's simply the SEC should put this and get this done, then being very, very clear about that in a rifle shot strategy is really key. So I have time for one more question if anybody has one, otherwise I'll wrap this up. Well, so let me do that. I know we ran over time. We started a little bit late, traffic, and I can't blame the hurricane. So, but thank you all for being here.
Nobody got here from Louisiana.
No, that's true. I don't think anybody tried. So let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.